have to look it up, but I think it's basically an affirmation. You know, like it's true.
Well, when you turn your phone,
I'll have to look though.
If you're holding it up like this, if you turn it like this, it turns like that. I know.
See, I had it over.
Our brains are not going on.
All right.
Right on the
It's-
back of a welcome to Herman card.
It's the
Adult Sunday School class at St. Paul United Church of Christ, welcome to Herman.
it's the 20th of February.
I did share your Facebook connection. I think that will get something
Okay.
out to people
Well,
about who
Well,
are
Jaya puts it on, but I get it from.
So be it, is what it means.
yeah, means
So be it.
so be it. Amen. Today is, as I said, the 20th of February, and we're dealing with the topic that people are interested in, which is Christian anti-Semitism. And we're dealing with kind of a difficult issue because the Christians had a different kind of anti-Semitism than the classical one. We talked about that at length, where the Egyptians and the Romans and Greeks who ruled over the homelands of the Jews had anti-Semitism, but it was more of a cultural, intellectual bias in that the Jews could easily cure that and quit being, in their mind, bumpkins and unsophisticated by adopting Greek ways or adopting Roman ways. And but both the Greeks and the Romans, and depending on which Greek government was then in charge of them, which part of the Greek Empire after Alexander's empire broke up, you know, they were more or less allowing the Jews to practice as they did and gave them some special status. Like with the Romans, the Jews didn't have to become tax collectors or things like that, because anything that involved even secondhand, you know, that money would go for building temples to the gods of Rome. Well, they couldn't do that because they were forbidden to participate anyway from the making of idols. Anyway, so
How come Hitler hated the Jews so bad?
well, we're going to get there.
Oh, okay.
That's actually the third phase. We have three phases of anti-Semitism. No, good point. We will touch on some things that Hitler did today, and in our we're going to talk about the connection between some of the early Christian Roman rules against the Jews and how they reappeared again in Hitler's government.
Maybe I dreamt it, but that Hitler's mother was Jewish?
Nah, they say Hitler's grandmother. His I think it was Hitler's half brother. Was it? I don't think it was his nephew. It was his half brother nephew who had a falling out with him and said that Hitler had a Jewish grandmother. And you know, you've also heard that Hitler's mother died of cancer, and he blamed the treatment of a Jewish doctor on her death. Anyway, there's lots of different reasons, but basically Hitler was a monster, and he's gonna find an enemy to vilify, to blame for. I mean, he could not. He wasn't
They
even.
had a few screws loose.
Well, yeah, no. Well, yeah, he's one of those people who was a genius and a monster, a genius in some ways and a monster in another. And he wasn't born in Germany. Where was he born?
Austria.
Linz, Austria. And he was going to turn that into like the Florence or the Paris of the world. He thought he was going to make the biggest art museum and loot Florence and Paris and all these places and take it to there. But he got into this pan-German idea. You know, he wanted to make Germany great again in a real way because, you know, Germany had fallen on hard times. It had lost World War I. It had lost its monarchy. It had lost its currency system when that collapsed. And then when they built some of that back up and rebuilt some from World War I with American help, among other things, then they had the Great Depression that everybody had to go through. At any rate, there are three phases of anti-Semitism. There's a classical anti-Semitism that was more of a cultural and intellectual bias, like the Egyptians had a sort of local rivalry. They and Jewish people never liked one another, which is evidenced in all these stories we have that badmouth Egypt as this terrible villain in the Old Testament. And then you have the period of anti-Semitism that is much sort of deeper in dislike and animosity and hatred and effect, which is once the Christians get in charge in the Roman Empire, and then carried forward once the barbarians knock the Christians emperors, the Roman emperors, once the Western emperor falls to the Huns, then they continue it. The church continues on. The barbarians become the new Romans, or try to. Anyway, and then in the 19th century, with the science making many, many gifts, some of these are not the gifts we think they are. One of the things was they had this great study on race where they would measure people's heads and do all these various things to decide that different races had different qualities, and there was a huge layer of Anglo-Saxon Aryan superiority, and you find some people who should have known better, like Theodore Roosevelt, diving into this thing with both feet. Now, it's not that Theodore Roosevelt was more prejudiced than some of these other people, but he bought into these scientific race theories and Aryans, and how the Japanese were okay because they were like almost Aryans, and it's just you read this stuff and it's pretty bad. But the thing about the racial theory, which started in the 19th century, the anti-Semitism of that, it brought over a quality from the Christian anti-Semitism, which was, unlike with the classical anti-Semitism, how do we say a Jew cures that?
By following
Crossing over.
Yeah, by crossing over. Yeah, by
Converting.
Converting or assimilating. Yeah, to become, when in Rome, do like the Romans, or
So
do
was
like your conquerors.
classical before Jesus really, and into Jesus, and then the others started after Jesus?
Yeah.
As a church,
Yeah.
Christian church.
Yeah, the classical continued a little bit after, because the Romans weren't, the Romans were not too happy because there were 3 Jewish wars within a relatively short period of time, and that really ticked them off. We know of the one that ended with the fall of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple, and Masada.
Yeah.
But there were 2 more after that.
After that,
And then they said, all right, the heck with it, chase you guys out of here. You can't come back except for one ceremony called Purim, which is a relatively modern Jewish ceremony. But you could come back that one time a year. But the Christians, how could a Jew cure his Jewishness?
Becoming a Christian?
He could become a Christian, yeah,
Be saved.
yeah. But if he didn't, what was his position if he didn't?
Marrying into them?
No. Now, his position was that not only were they guilty of these great crimes that occurred long before their birth, but their children and their children's children down to all generations. And they incorporated this. I mean, you asked the other day, you said, well, let me answer. I'm going to skip off for 1 second, answer one quick question that you raised last week. And what was, did the Qumran community people, these Essene or Essene-like people at the Qumran community by the Dead Sea, did they write the Dead Sea Scrolls? And I said, yes, they did write the Dead Sea Scrolls. But the importance of the Dead Sea Scrolls is not necessarily that they wrote them, it's that they also wrote down copies of a bunch of the parts of the Torah. So a lot of the Jewish religious writings that we have from them are a lot older than the ones that we were using for our Bibles when Christian Church was putting together their translations of the Old Testament. So my favorite Bible I use is the New Revised Standard Version. And the Revised Standard Version just came out just hit the shelves, and around the same time they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. So they had to come up with a new Revised Standard Version because they had to go back and say these are older versions of the Old Testament books that were written down by the scribes in the Qumran community, and these are probably superior. They can analyze them and say, well, these are more likely better versions than what we had fifth hand when we used the more recent texts to provide the translation basis for our Old Testament. All right. Now, the other question you asked was, who killed Jesus? Were the Jews responsible for Jesus? And I know you were skeptical, I could tell, because, all you have to do is you have to read the Bible. And the Bible says that the Jews killed Jesus, and that the Jews even recognized they killed Jesus, and that the Jews said, the guilt be upon us, his blood be upon us, and upon our children. And it says in John that Jews weren't children of God, they're children of the devil. And I could list, I don't know how many, from, this is a terrible and sinful generation, to the Jews always kill their prophets, to, all these things that say that the Jews were a terrible and, wayward people who were just always ready to fall off the religious wagon and engage in some sort of behavior that is terrible in the sight of God. But remember that these were written a generation after Jesus died, and already just very shortly after Jesus died, what was, the Christians were speaking in the synagogues and trying to spread their message, and they weren't being very accepted, but they were at least being tolerated to some extent. And then what did Stephen say?
Well, something that got him killed.
Got him killed, yeah. He went up there and he said, your religion is not a religion of God, that you have no covenant with God. That this circumcision and you following the law, it's all for nothing. Now, they were careful not to say that Abraham didn't have a covenant with God, because that would kind of screw up their little timeline. But they said when Moses went up on the mountain and the Jews down there were twiddling their thumbs and saying, he ain't coming back, And so they melted down their gold and they made a golden calf, and they said, the heck with the God of Israel, we're going to worship this golden calf. And Moses came back and smashed the tablets. Stephen said, and people like him said, this is when you lost your connection with God. You abrogated your covenant with God. And ever since then, you didn't. And they said, oh, and besides, the only reason you have these laws, we don't have to follow them, because the only reason you had them is because you're a wayward and sinful, horrible people. And so, and this is right after Jesus, this is shortly after Jesus' death. And so the Jewish leaders said, look, we don't want this kind of preaching anymore here, because you're not just saying that you're misguided. Now, the Greeks and the Romans might have said, what sort of voodoo religion you have, we don't know, we don't care, just don't create a fuss. Okay. Until the Seleucid Greeks came in and they said, okay, now you're going to, prevent some of your behavior. But most of their history, the conquering powers just said, look, just don't cause trouble. You're kind of foolish people, but practice what you want. But the Christians came out and said, your religion is of the devil. It's of evil, and you killed your God. You killed your own God. And the Jews are saying, look, you can believe what you want, but we don't accept the fact that Jesus is the fulfillment of the prophecies of the Bible, that he is the Messiah that was foretold. We just don't buy that. And the Christians said, this is, especially because early church period, around the time that from Jesus' death up through and past Roman acceptance, around 300 of Christianity as the main religion of the Roman Empire, they were in competition. The Jews were back then much more evangelical in their proselytizing. Later on, you'll find they back off a lot, and they're much more conservative in they're not outreaching and trying to convert people like the Jewish church of that early church period and the Christian church were. So, you can look at the Bible and say, well, I can prove to you because look there in the Bible, it says right there that the Jews killed him, but it also says that, Jesus descended from these two different lineages, and it also has many different creation stories, and it also John has Jesus being arrested and killed on the day of preparation before Passover, and the other Gospels have Jesus being killed after, the Passover meal, which never even occurs in John. There's just, you can't point to the Bible and say, it says it here, I believe that settles it. And you go, well, which thing it says? Because they say contradictory things.
So how do we know what's true? We just have to have it on faith. We got to know the history of what's going on, who would be in charge.
Well,
Just
what we do
understanding
is,
culture.
in this we're looking at facts. In this we're looking at laws that were passed and things like that. So we can get a pretty good idea. And you got a lot of the people who are church fathers. And a lot of these people who were early church fathers, I think I've got the names right here, but there was an early voluminous, multi-volume history of church written by Eusebius. And Eusebius quotes other people, and sometimes the only thing we know about them is what Eusebius says. But some of these people, early people, they were saying all these things terrible about the Jews. And they would say some things that were illuminating. They would say things that were, like with Augustine, you can say many things that you may fully agree with, but then he also says that these Jews are terrible people. And so you've got people who, on the one hand, are venerated as early Christian leaders, and on the other hand, they are spewing hatred against the Jewish people. And not just that these Jews may have killed Jesus back then, but that Jews today carry that burden and guilt. Okay. It wasn't, let me get back to the story now. It wasn't a straight road. Like the quote I read from before, the path wasn't necessarily direct, but you can get to Auschwitz from some of these early feelings. And so after Constantine, they had his successor was named Julian. Now, Julian, the Roman emperor, he said, yeah, no, I'm gonna convert back. I think he was, I don't remember if he converted back or if he just believed in the Romans' traditional religions, but he was sort of friendly toward the Jews. He said, yeah, I'm not a Christian. And he even talked about rebuilding Jerusalem and allowing the Jews to go back and rebuild the temple. But
This was about 400.
this was, somewhere around there.
Okay.
And probably before that, it's probably in the 300s.
300?
Yeah.
Well, somewhere.
Yeah,
Okay.
but he was killed the following year on campaign, so
Whoops. That was all.
that was quick.
Whoops.
And then we've talked about some of the earlier laws, but now around 379, under Theodosius I, he was an emperor, and under his sons, the positions of the Jews worsened sharply. And a lot of the laws, while they impinge on Jewish rights and privileges, also go further because the language of the law calls Jews Feralus secta, a savage and animalistic sect, and talks about their wickedness and their outrageous crimes. And their meetings are, when they're talking about whether they can restrict or not restrict their worship, it's always their sacrilegious gatherings.
This
And
is ridiculous that
Yeah.
they were saying that.
well, it's not ridiculous. I mean, this
I
is
mean, there was no basis.
yeah.
Savage?
Yep. And anyone who if there was a marriage between a Christian and Jew, it was adultery, and anyone could inform on the couple. And they prohibited building new synagogues, and they prohibited improving existing ones. These are under the law. And in certain places, Jewish meetings, religious meetings, were just prohibited. And, you didn't have the Greeks and the Romans doing this. And we talked about in 388, there was a bishop, Ambrose of Milan, who he riled people up in his sermons against the Jews, and they went out and burned down a synagogue. And then the emperor sent him a message saying, it's like, you don't have any guilt, nobody's going to be punished, but you got to rebuild it. You got to pay for it. And Ambrose was not going to stand for this. He had this big resistance, and the emperor came to kind of put his foot down, and Ambrose was not going to administer communion on that service. Would have been basically a de facto excommunication. And he went in and talked with the emperor alone, and the emperor came out and said, yeah, okay, you don't have to
Rebuild it.
yeah, you don't have to rebuild it.
Pass.
And the one thing that sticks out for me on this was that during their sort of head-to-head struggle, Ambrose said, yes, I should be punished. I should be punished because I left the other synagogues unburned.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and so
that's in Italy, right? We're in Italy.
well, that's in Milan, but
Italy.
this is not restricted just to Milan. This is just general. The religious leaders who have these settled manifestations of hatred against Jews, and they see them as a competition, and they see them as questioning their own legitimacy. The Romans didn't say, oh, well, there's these problems with your religious texts, but the Jews did say, the Christians said, look, the prophecies prove we're right. And the Jews said, yeah, we don't read those prophecies that way. The Messiah was going to be a different kind of person. We don't think Jesus fit that. And they go, my God, our risen Savior, and it's the settled manifestations of hate and alienation between Christians and the Jews.
Steve,
Yep.
what's going on today in anti-Semitism?
Well, we're not there yet. Let's go on with this.
We haven't even got to that.
And
Germany yet.
We're
So
running out of time.
well,
We can do one more.
if we chase rabbits, we will run out of time. But okay, let's in the same year, in 399, so around 400, you start to get new prohibitions. Jews were forbidden to hold public office, and 5th century Christians were they were all of a sudden. You remember the permissiveness that allowed the Jews the freedom of religion to practice their own. Okay, that's rolled back. And they're deprived of all military and court rank, and that didn't prove workable because it's like getting rid of all these people who are qualified and doing jobs. So what they did was just, I said, okay, like you're in an army, doesn't matter if you're a general or a colonel or whatever, you're now a private. You're reduced down to the ranks. And there were some people could go for sanctuary if they were being chased by debtors. They could go into the church. Well, Jews couldn't do this. And then you have a Theodosius II. This is the second Theodosius. And he becomes much more anti-Jewish in the legislations. And they start to say, oh, well, there were these Jews are taking children and killing them during they're crucifying Christian children. And this will come a lot more to fruition during the Middle Ages when they say, okay, the Jews are killing children and drinking their blood and using their blood to make the Passover bread.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, it sounds real familiar, doesn't it? It's like a conspiracy of people who are killing and trafficking children to drink their blood. It's like, where have we heard this before?
Nothing new in this
Yeah.
world,
It's
is
in
there?
a pizza house today.
Yeah, in the basement of the pizza house, and the pizza house was built on a slab, so they cleverly disguised. Yeah. All right. So, and another thing was that there was a patriarch, and a patriarch was, once the Jews were cleared out, the patriarch was somebody that the Jews could send money to, and he would support Jewish activities worldwide. Well, the Romans just decided, guess what? That's money, and that's also Jewish people being able to do something Jewish and having a leader, an identifiable leader. So they basically said there is no patriarch anymore, and all the money that was collected for the patriarchs is now forfeit to the Roman throne. So they're making the religious people happy, the religious anti-Jewish people happy, and they're also benefiting the state. Okay, so they no longer have this patriarchal exemption. They can't give money to their religious leaders, and there was a widespread burning. This is around, after 429, the widespread burning of synagogues and Jewish houses. And did anybody see the movie? Was it In the Heat of the Night? I think it was an old movie with Sidney Poitier, who comes in, and Carol O'Connor is a local sheriff in Georgia or Alabama or someplace.
I've seen it, I don't
All right.
remember. Yeah,
And
I've
and
seen it.
and this guy's a black detective from Philadelphia or something. He comes down there and he's trying to solve the crime. And they have one time where he's in a warehouse or something, and there's this white redneck that just is trying to kill him. I mean, trying to kill him with an axe or a iron rod or something. And finally, at the end, Carol O'Connor comes in and stops him from killing this black policeman. And he says, basically, put that down, go on home, forget about it. Tells the white guy. It's like, wait a minute, this guy's like trying to kill a police detective with a deadly weapon, an axe or whatever, and you just stop it and say, oh, cut that out. Just go on home there.
Yes.
Go home, have a beer, and it's like there's no punishment. Well, that's what you're getting in here. They're burning down synagogues. They're burning Jewish houses. They're taking Jewish property. And people are saying, good. Okay. And again, you find that you had this one guy, just talking about religious leaders who are at odds with the empire. They had this fellow named Simon Stylites, and probably nobody's ever heard of that. But he was a famous ascetic. He showed his Christian faith by living for 37 years atop of a pillar 50 feet high.
Oh, that was nice.
Yeah, that's I missed the part where Jesus said that we should do that. Must be
That's
from the Old
like,
Testament. But
There's a minister in Chicago that's on top of a building because of the homelessness and stuff like that. He's up on top of a building and has been for I don't know how long on the top of that building. In Chicago, he's up there right now too.
well, maybe being exposed to elements or something. Maybe he's got some
I mean,
tangential
he's
rational
working.
relationship.
He's trying to raise money
Mhm.
by staying up there
Mhm.
for the homeless people.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
bringing attention to the problem.
It's an African-American preacher in Chicago that is sitting on top of this building. He has a tent and all this kind of stuff. He's not totally in the element.
Have you given money?
I haven't, no, I don't give money to anybody but local people. So, occasionally, if somebody at a funeral home wants it, well, then I may, but.
Bringing, attention to the problem.
So sitting on top of the pillar puts them closer to God, isn't that the way?
I-
it used to-
Well, I don't know.
Isn't that
That's-
how when they built their temples, the old Roman gods and that, they built them high because that made them closer to the gods, so maybe he sat on top of that pillar so he could be
yeah.
closer to God.
Yeah, and also because it showed his asceticism. He
Yeah.
wasn't having any comforts. He was sitting on top of this pillar, and yeah. But he was celebrated, for his holiness, and a lot of these people displayed anti-Judaism in full proportion to their fervor for Christianity, and it got to where the laws were such that newly constructed synagogues were forfeited to the Catholic Church, to the church. And if you were caught even repairing a damaged synagogue, not improving it anymore, it's just repairing a damaged one, it's a substantial fine. And if you tried to convert a Christian now, death for you. And there's no further pretense that these are in response to some Jewish crime. It's just these are.
Plus, you may explain the fact that Jesus Christ, which will become Christians, but Jesus was a Jew. He preached at the synagogue. How do
Well-
they get around that?
Well, it's you
He
find a
was,
reason
he was
you
a
you
Jew.
find a reason to hate. You find a people to vilify. In the United States, it used to be, the Irish were coming, and the Irish were going to marry your daughters and ruin society, and they were all the army of the Pope that was going over, and I mean they had to establish before that, they had to establish the colony of Maryland, because in most colonies, if you were Catholic, you couldn't even work in any sort of public office. You were highly suspect. There are people vilify other people, and
Just
it
because they
doesn't
need somebody
have to
feel
make,
superior to.
it doesn't make sense. Yeah, they need someone also to motivate you. Like you have to be, like Hitler made people feel like Germany was so threatened that they followed him into an insane war one generation after, 30 years after a whole generation had been wiped out by the previous war.
I read a book, it's called The Only Woman in the Room, and it's about Hedy Lamarr, who was married at 17, I think, to the primary arms dealer in Austria, and it goes through her, it tells her story there, and then after she came to the United States and what she was able to do. But, and it's not her acting that's in this book. One of the interesting things in there, her husband was part Jewish, and so was she. I mean, she was all Jewish, but anyway, Hitler, and she heard him say this, Hitler said, "I'm making you an honorary Aryan," because he was the main producer of all the arms and everything in Austria and all of that, so he became an honorary Aryan.
Mm-hmm.
So Hitler could still work with him.
Yep. There's a book by a guy, I forgot what he did, but he had some specialized skill, and he was in an area that was gobbled up by Germany, and he told them, "I'm Jewish," and they still made him go in the army, they still drafted him, made him serve, and throughout the war he'd say, "I'm Jewish," and but he had some specialized skills, so they made him
They
do
had to justify it.
Yeah.
Why don't they tell some people, how you're a credit to your race or something?
Oh,
like
yeah,
that?
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Say things like that.
so things are getting really bad here, and in a province in North Africa, part of the empire, Judaism was just outlawed, and synagogues were closed, and Jews were subjected to forced baptism. And once the barbarians took over, as we said, they decided to adopt the mantle of that they were now the new Romans rather than barbarianize Rome. And we're going to look at a couple of things.
Where are we now? Are we
Okay.
on 700 or I've got a.
No, we're going to jump ahead right now to talk a little bit about a thing about Hitler at the end. Just 1 second here. All right. But to show you how some of these early laws were revived by Hitler. A lot of these things didn't stop, early on. A lot of these went through the Middle Ages, and there's a time that we'll probably talk about next week where all Jews were expelled from basically from Europe, from Western Europe. They were all chased out of England. Anybody know that? And then they were all chased out of France, and they were chased out of Spain. But we'll talk about that next week. But if we look at the canon laws, let's look at some of the things that Hitler did and some of the things that canon law in the early years. Okay, in 306, prohibition of intermarriage and sexual intercourse between Christians and Jews. That was the Synod of Elvira in 306. Nazi measure that mirrored that was the Law for the Protection of German Blood and Honor in 35. Canon law, I'm going to just skip back and forth between canon law. Canon law is Jews and Christians not permitted to eat together. Again, the same synod. And Nazis, the Jews were banned from dining cars, so they couldn't eat with Christians. Canon law, Jews were not allowed to hold public office. The Synod of Clermont in 535. And the law for reestablishment of the professional civil service in Germany in 33, right after the Nazis took over. Jews were not allowed to employ Christian servants or possess Christian slaves. That's the Third Synod of Orleans in 538. Well, the Germans had law for the protection of German blood and honor in 1935. Canon law, Jews not permitted to show themselves on the streets during the Passion Week. And Nazi measures decreed that Jews were forbidden to go on the streets on certain days like Nazi holidays. Canon law, they burned the Talmud and other books, the 12th Synod of Toledo in 681, and there were book burnings of all sorts in Nazi Germany. Canon law said Christians not permitted to patronize Jewish doctors. And for the Nazis, that was a decree of July 25th, 1938. But 692 for the Christians, 1938 for the Nazis. Christians were not permitted to live in Jewish homes, the Synod of Narbonne in 1050. And there was a directive by Goering for providing concentration of Jews in houses, in certain areas. Matter of fact, our Lucky Lindbergh was going to go over to Germany after, I think it was after the start of the war, but he was going to go over to Germany, and his friends, he'd bought an apartment, got an apartment, and his friends said, you don't want to live there. Jews used to live there. So Lindy went, yeah, okay, now I'm not going to do that. He's quite a character. All right.
Please.
He was
Christian.
very anti-Semitic.
He was.
Very.
He was.
Very anti-Semitic.
And Christians not permitted to live in Jewish homes. Why I said that? Okay. Jews were obligated to pay taxes for support of the church, the Christian church, to the same extent that Christians were, and that was in 1078. And then you had in Nazi Germany, they had to pay donations and support the Nazi party. And Jews not permitted to be plaintiffs or witnesses against Christians in the courts. That was in 1179. And similar rules in 1942 in Germany, not permitted to testify in court. Jews were not permitted to withhold inheritance from descendants who accepted Christianity. And the Nazis came up with a way that they could just cancel a will if it offended sound judgment of the people. The markings of Jewish clothes under Christian church with a badge, that was in 1215, and the decree in Germany of September 1st, 1941 with yellow stars. As a matter of fact, some of the Christian areas, different Christian areas had different markings, but a lot of them prominently featured either yellow or white. And yellow was the most common one that I saw. As far as they had to wear a yellow badge on their hat, on their coat.
You saw it?
Huh?
You saw this?
Yeah, I saw this in the when I'm doing this, I look up and I thought, oh, well, what kind of badges did they have to wear? And I was interested, so I looked into that, and it was all different sort of badges in different places. And the Muslims made Christians and Jews wear different sort of sashes, but there were lots of badges on hats and in the Christian areas.
Signifying what?
Signifying you're a Jew, like the yellow star under
It's
Nazi.
interesting, it's a historical fiction novel, but the facts of it are true. It's called The Pope's Son, where a young Jewish boy was about to die, a baby. His Catholic helper in the house baptized him. She wasn't a priest, she wasn't anything else like that, but she baptized him so that God could save this child. The Catholic Church took that child from his parents, and actually he kind of became the Pope's son, and it is a true story.
Mhm.
So it's amazing what the Catholic Church did to that Jewish family because of this. And you were talking about the Catholics weren't supposed to work with Jews. This woman was working for this Jewish family illegally, and all. So
Yeah, but it's just amazing we'll find, especially around the time of the Crusade. Next week we'll talk about the Middle Ages and the expulsion of Jews from England, these other places, and what happened to the Jews before the Christian Crusaders went off to do the Crusades. But let me just finish this list of early canon law and later Nazi law to see how many of these things were revived.
Do you think they were revived because they knew about them, or just because that this is what they do?
Oh, well, this
They don't even
is, some of
know
these
about
things
it.
had continued off and on
Yeah.
ever since.
They just do them.
Christians, let me just, there were compulsory ghettos in 1267, take Jews out of where they lived and force them to congregate in these crummy areas of town. What do you think happened to their property? Oh boy, what a surprise! So see, again. There's a religious push that pleases these religious leaders, and then you've also got a pecuniary gain. And Heydrich was a German official in charge of doing that in the Nazis, and Christians were not permitted to sell or rent real estate to the Jews. And the Nazi measure, they had a compulsory sale of Jewish real estate in '38, where Jews had to sell for whatever price the Nazis wanted to give them. And if they gave them anything at all, in some cases they just make them run for their life, and then they say, oh, it's been abandoned, I'm taking it. And all their artwork. All right, and talking about adoptions being prevented, and Jews not being able to get academic degrees. It goes on and on and on like this in terms of these are things where early Christians, once they got in a position, they could take the philosophy that's expressed even in our Gospels of hatred and vilification toward the Jews and blaming the Jews. When the Romans nailed Jesus to the cross and killed him, he died in a Roman court of a Roman charge in front of a Roman leader, and then was executed by Roman soldiers in a way that only the Romans executed people. And yet Christians managed to twist this and blame this on present-day Jews. It's like hatred does not have to make sense. And so we're going to see how this gets even worse next week in medieval Europe, and then leading up to the racial theories of the 19th century, where they say, okay, these people can't even convert. They're just tainted by, it's like if you lived in the American South, if you were 1/16 black, if you had any identifiable black relative, guess what you were?
Black.
Yeah, you were black. All right.
So what do you think? I want to look up a little bit more about the Japanese. They were put in a kind of concentration camp.
Yeah, yes and no. Now
And what happened to their property? That's what I don't know.
Some of
That's what I
that's
don't know.
yeah, in California, I think some of them were forced to sell very quickly, and I think a lot of that, yeah. But it's a little tiny bit complicated in a way that people don't talk about. Now, you take American citizens and you put them into these concentration camps, and a lot of these were people born in America. But you also had, let's just not get into that can of worms.
I'd like to know if they took their property and sold.
I think they did on some.
I think they did
There was a young man that graduated
some
from high
areas.
school with me, his father was a doctor and he was a doctor, Dr. Kanagawa. And he, when, I think it was his first, I wasn't in school in Jeff City at this time, first grade birthday party. His mother asked him what he wanted on his birthday cake that he was taking to school. And this just came out on Facebook just not too long ago. I think he's died. So, but anyway, came out and he said, put American flags so they'll know I'm an American.
Wow.
Because his family had been, and he was my age, so he was born in 1939 probably, or at that age. So,
Does anybody know Nobby?
sure, I do exercises with Nobby.
Okay, he was born in this concentration camp.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, there were a number of concentration camps. Yeah.
You know Nobby?
No, I
You
don't.
probably do.
No,
He's
he does,
No.
yoga and Tai Chi out at the nursing homes and out at the fitness schools.
Well, they had a lot of these people who were in concentration camps who volunteered for service in the United States Army, and they didn't want to use them against in the Pacific Theater for a number of reasons, and they sent them to Italy. It was a regimental combat team. It was the highest decorated unit in the United States Army in World War II.
What
They-
they do,
they-
everything.
They did everything, and one of them is like, who's the fellow? He was a senator from Hawaii, and he died not too many years
I
ago.
don't remember his name. I don't
He
remember his
won the Medal of Honor. But if you read it, it's like, he's fighting against the Germans, and he's advancing, and he ends up advancing by himself with his Thompson submachine gun. And he gets his arm blown off, I think, or his hand hanging by a fragment, and he's using body pressure to keep himself from passing out as he's still advancing to destroy the German machine guns. And he's hit time and time again, and he's still, as one person, as long as he's got ammunition, he's crawling forward and attempting to eliminate these German strong points. And and you say, if this isn't enough, if this isn't enough, then they're not going to like anybody. If they don't like him, if they don't say, look at this man and see how he is an American.
Right, Ann Warland periodically on, the day Pearl Harbor was, she will post on Facebook, my half Japanese children are not responsible for that. Because her first husband was Japanese, and she has 3 beautiful, smart kids by him, but they get this, thing, and so she periodically points that out, especially, they're all out of school and not living here in Herman anymore, but especially when they were still around here. She wanted to make sure that people understood that they were not responsible for it.
But her son, because I had her son, and when we